Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to talk a little bit more about applying for financial aid. Hopefully this is a relevant topic for you. Maybe it's for you in particular, maybe it's for students that you know, maybe your children, maybe grandchildren. We are happy to help in whatever way we can. My name is Sarah Scruggs. I am Harvard University Employees Credit Union Community Engagement Specialist, and I'm so glad to be with you today to talk a little bit more about this topic. Something that I do want to say, if you can let me know in the chat or Q&A, if you could please just let me know why you're joining today. Are you joining today because you're interested in financial aid for yourself? Maybe you're interested in it for your own student, for your child, anything of that nature. I'd love to hear more about why you've joined us today. So if you could put that either in the Q&A or the chat. Awesome. So it looks like okay, so we've got a couple of different answers. Looks like for my child, for my student. Okay, wonderful. All right, great. For my child is what I'm mostly hearing. So that's good to know. That helps me to shape my presentation to best help you in these moments. So I appreciate y'all letting me know that. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Harvard University Employees Credit Union is Harvard's not-for-profit financial institution. We exclusively serve the Harvard community. We have everything that a bank does, but we believe we do it just a little bit better, being more community focused. So making sure that we're focused on our community here at Harvard, focusing in on all of those folks who need financial wellness, financial help. We are here to provide that for them. Our products and services can all be accessed online or through our mobile app. So even if your relationship with Harvard changes, you would still be a member with us. And then of course, we are family oriented as well. So once you become a member, anyone in your family could also become a member. So some good things to remember, and I'm happy to talk more about whatever the credit union can help with. But this is one of the ways that we do help our community is by talking more about different financial wellness initiatives, including financial aid. That's an important piece of the puzzle when we talk about financial success, especially now. So we're going to start off pretty basic and then go through a couple of different things with the FAFSA. And so we're going to start with the types of financial aid. You can really break it down into 3 different groups. There's going to be the federal work-study group. Your college or university could also possibly have a work-study program, but more than likely it would be under federal work-study. Loans, including private and federal loans, and then grants and scholarships. Grants and scholarships are our favorite out of these 3 because that is our free money or money we don't have to give back. Whereas with the federal work study, we're paying that by doing labor of some type for someone. And then in loans, we are paying that back eventually. Whereas with grants and scholarships, we just get that money because we are wonderful. So that is what you want most of. But we are going to hear about those other 2 today as well, because they do all inform a really important picture for us. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how these 2 can be given. Need versus merit-based. Need-based aid is based upon a family's financial need. A family's financial need is a pretty vague term. Some families believe that the FAFSA may not capture their actual need, and this can look different for everyone. And so you'll see how the FAFSA calculates it, what goes into this information, and so that would be your financial need. It includes grants, loans, and work study. So you can, based on a child's need, they can receive grants, they can receive loans, and they can possibly receive work study. All federal aid is need-based. The federal government isn't going around giving out merit-based scholarships. That's just not going to happen. What the federal government is doing is trying to help those families who may need more. So that is their goal with federal aid. Most state aid is also based on need. That's something to note. Not all state aid, but most state aid is based on need. From time to time, universities will also grant need-based aid. It just depends. Some universities grant need-based aid, not all. Then there's merit-based aid. This is based on accomplishments of the student. Those can be academic, of course, that's probably what we hear about most. There's also athletic accomplishments that many students are awarded aid for. There's music-based scholarships, that is technically merit. There's also maybe dance. Those types of things are all based on the recognition. And a lot of times these things are often compared. What does that mean? Well, what does that mean is that somebody in the financial aid office may make a decision based on a student's, let's say, GPA and test scores comparatively to everyone else in their class, in the incoming class. And this is an important thing to note. The merit-based aid is a little more competitive in the sense that if a student does perform well or does something well, they could get the highest amount available. And so that's why you'd see it's often compared. This aid may or may not be renewable. Renewable means that you can have it all 4 years. So if your student is going to a 4-year institution, that would be imperative that you know that information. There are some smaller scholarships that are going to be one-off, 1 year. Here's a quick $1,000 that you can use this year, but no other years. Whereas some merit-based aid, a lot of times coming directly from the institution, will be multiple year and renewable. Previously, I've worked in an admissions office at a university, and all of our merit-based aid that we gave out was renewable for students, all 4 years. Of course, making sure that they kept up with the standards that we asked. Those can be different for every university. But it's a good question to ask if you do receive a scholarship packet and you're wondering, okay, is this renewable or not? There are also private scholarships. This is the number one thing I think students sometimes forget about. A lot of times institutions and federal government and state governments can only help so much. And so private scholarships are there to help fill in those gaps. And they are there for all students. Many different types of scholarships, whether that be based on need. There are definitely some based on need, but there are also some based on many other factors, merit in many different ways. Make sure if your student is applying for private scholarships that they are using a free service. Applying for outside private scholarships should be free. Check with your school counselor if they're asked to pay for anything to make sure that it is legitimate and that your student won't be out just a $20, $30, $40 because of this. So how do you start asking around and asking questions about private scholarships? Really, the first thing and best place to go is with a school counselor. Maybe your student is in a large public school that doesn't have as much access to school counselors. They probably have a list, possibly on their website, possibly in their office, of where students have received private scholarships before. This is a pretty common practice, and many school counselors do have access to this. Online search engines, one that comes up quite a bit that I know many students have used in the past when I've worked with them is fastweb.com. Fastweb.com. And there are probably, I don't know, maybe like 10,000 or so private scholarship opportunities on there. So these can be really overwhelming for students. So what I try to encourage is maybe searching for specific keywords. If your student is involved in anything in particular, that may be a good place to start so that they're not looking at 1,000, 2,000 different scholarships all at one time. Place of employment, maybe for you, maybe for them. They may have a job, your student may have a job, you may have a job that offers scholarships for students going to school. Here at Harvard, one of the ways that you could look into that is through a private scholarship with the credit union, and I'll be happy to tell you about that on the next slide. But there are places that do help out with school. Starbucks gives opportunities for educational scholarships for their employees. and many different fast food restaurants offer different programs for students. So highly recommend that you look into that if your student is working, or if possibly you, a spouse, a grandparent, cousin, aunt may have some connection to a private scholarship somewhere. Your city or town of residence may have a scholarship program for students. A lot of times these are pretty competitive, but they are an opportunity for students to get that private scholarship. And then the last one is the financial institution. If you are connected to any financial institutions, many institutions have scholarship programs, including ours at the credit union. Our scholarship program is non-renewable, 1 year scholarship for students. We give out 10 different scholarships each year. They are open to high school seniors to apply, and they have a couple of questions to answer for us. And this is based solely on our selection committee's preference for what they learn and read about this student based on their essays, as well as any background information they provide us. And our members actually select these students. So our scholarship committee selects these students. So if you have any questions about our scholarship at the credit union, I'm happy to answer those. And the student has to be connected to a member in some way. This could look like a parent being the member, or the student being a member of Harvard University Employees Credit Union. This is very common. Many financial institutions have a scholarship program. You've probably seen many different financial institutions here in Massachusetts give out scholarships, and we are happy to be a part of that here at the credit union as well. So that's more of an overview of the types and the different things you should be looking out for with aid. Now we're going to really get into applying for financial aid. We're going to talk a lot more about the FAFSA in this section. That's the free application for federal student aid, and one of the most important documents when it comes to financial aid. Like I said, the federal student aid application is the FAFSA. The free application for federal student aid is what that stands for. FAFSA.gov is where all this information lives. It is one form, and it is almost always required by universities and colleges. Required is an interesting term because they're not going to make you fill it out if you say, I don't want to fill it out, but they cannot give you any aid if you don't fill it out. So the only way you can receive aid is by filling this out. My advice to my families was, unless you're Bill Gates, go ahead and fill it out 1 year and just see if there's anything that comes of it, because it can be surprising. With the FAFSA, it does need to be completed each year. Every year that your student is in school, it does need to be completed. This goes for undergraduate school, it goes for graduate programs. They are always going to be filling this out. It becomes available each year on October 1st, which is coming up. I normally recommend to my students October 2nd is the perfect date to start working on the FAFSA. October 1st, they get all of the, any of the mess ups on the website all figured out and fixed. And by October 2nd, it should be good to go. But I encourage them to do it as soon as possible, because if we're doing it as soon as possible, there's no way that we get to the end when we're deciding on colleges and we haven't gotten a financial aid package yet because of a holdup with our FAFSA. We've already taken care of that. When you log in to do the FAFSA, you will receive an FSA ID, or you'll make an FSA ID. For the FSA ID, hold on to it. Your student will make it, and they need it 4 years. If they're an undergraduate, they need it all those years. If they forget it, they can redo it. It is much easier to hold on to it. I've had college students tell me this over and over, that it is important to keep on that FSA ID, that you keep that somewhere important. So what information goes into the FAFSA? The first part will be the parent and student demographic information. And this piece of the puzzle has to be filled out by you all. There is no kind of automatic sense of things here, whereas with the tax information, there's a little workaround that you can use. But with the demographic information, it's important that you sit and fill this out. I also want to point out that yes, the student needs to do this, but I think it's really important that you as the parent also sit with your student and fill this out together. There may be things that they're unaware of that need to be filled out correctly with the parent. So parent and student demographics, including parents. So who is a parent? There are many specific rules about this, about who qualifies as a parent for each student. And so there are some examples there, but what I want to tell you is that it's important, if you have questions, go onto the FAFSA website or go and call the FAFSA helpline. They will be able to work out any issues you in particular may have. So if you have further questions about the definition of parent, a great thing to do is reach out to the FAFSA helpline, and they'll be able to let you know in your situation what you need to say. Number of household and children in college. So how many people live in your house, whether they are your family or not, and how many children are in college at one time. Citizenship status, selective service registration. Selective service registration is extremely important. There have been so many times where a student has told me that they've filled out the FAFSA. They've called and said, hey, I filled that out a couple months ago. And I've gone in and I've seen that it's flagged for selective service. All males, when they turn 18, have to register for the selective service. And the FAFSA will not let us process any documents until they've done this. And if your student is 17 at the beginning of the year, turns 18, they will need to go and make sure that they do this on their 18th birthday, because it will flag the financial aid office at the universities and colleges and say, you can't give out any aid. You need to get them on the selective service. So this is an important step. The very end, you'll fill out what colleges you would like to send the FAFSA to. There can only be up to 10 at any one time. So let's say that your student is interested in 15 different universities and colleges. So send it to the top 10 on their list at that time. A few schools will probably fall off of that list, and you can start filling them in with those last 5. This has never been an issue. You can always take off a school and then send it to a new school. I've found that easily adding schools, you don't have to go through all the paperwork again. You can just add on an additional school. So what financial information is on the FAFSA? This is a great question. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about this as well, and what goes into the FAFSA, what doesn't go into the FAFSA. So I want to set out those clear expectations here. Your income. This is particularly for parents normally. If your student is making a large enough income to file taxes, then their income will also be on this information. It is taxed and untaxed information. So if they're, taxed and untaxed income. So if there is a job that you have maybe on the side that's untaxed, it does need to be reported on the FAFSA. And it is your 2020 income for the FAFSA that you'd be filling out here. So it's the prior year. Why is that? It's because we haven't filed our taxes yet for 2021, right? So it is your income from quite some time ago. If there are large differences in between your income then and your income now, FAFSA and the universities and colleges will work with you. And they have forms, there are federal regulations that need to be followed for that type of thing. But they're happy to work with you if there's been an incredible change in income from then to now. There are going to be assets that have to be included in the FAFSA, including checking and savings accounts, investments, and properties. It does not include the value of your primary home. Let's say that you have a home here in Boston and you have a home on the Cape. The home on the Cape has to be included in your assets. Your Boston home does not, because they realize they want to encourage home ownership. Retirement accounts are not included. Again, they want to encourage you to save for retirement, and they don't expect you to use that income to pay for college for your students. So retirement income is not included. Any life insurance that you hold at the time is not included. And then if you have a small family business, I believe this is up to 50 employees, and you own this business, you do not have to report that as an asset. I do want to say, if there are any questions, please do put those in the chat. I'm more than happy to answer as best as I can or help you with the person to ask. So I want to talk a little bit more about impact of assets versus the impact of income. And what you'll see here is really a concept more than the specific numbers that I'd like you to see. And I'd like you to see how each of them impact the FAFSA and the information on there. So you see here that all families have the same income. And then the families all have different amounts of assets. Their income is the taxed and untaxed income on their taxes, whereas the assets are things like a second home, things like their checking and savings accounts. Those are all included in assets. So you see here that their expected family contribution, which we'll speak about in a little while, or what the FAFSA says that they expect their family to be able to pay towards college, is not super different from family A to family C. Although their assets are quite different from family A to family C. So their difference here is really not that large from family A to family C, whereas you're seeing here really large differences in between family A's assets and family C's assets. Why is this? Well, it's because when you see the list of what assets are qualified as, this may not be money that you can necessarily put towards college education for a student, whereas a larger income difference may show your ability to pay a little bit more. That's a great question. So home value, I don't know exactly how the mortgage plays into it. Of course, your primary residence is not included. So any information about your primary residence, no need to put that on the FAFSA. Secondary home, I don't know exactly how much, but I believe it's home value that you are, that the value that you own, so the equity of the home, but I'm not 100% sure. Again, a great person to contact or people to contact is the FAFSA. I'll give you their phone number, I think in just a few more slides. So I highly recommend contacting them to ask about exactly what you need to put on the FAFSA for that second home. So now we're going to look into the income impact versus the assets. So you see here that there's a wide range of incomes all the way from family A to family C. Their assets all stay the same. Their expected family contributions, there is a much larger difference in between family A and family C. Why is this? That is because there is a much larger difference in between their incomes. So really what the concept is here is that we want to see that when the federal government is looking at the FAFSA, they are much more worried about your income. They are looking at that income much more than they are the assets. Okay, so it's a much larger difference in between the two. So again, this is really not about numbers specifically, but about the concept of it. Here's that wonderful slide. I have called the FAFSA helpline myself. I normally hate 1-800 numbers. I think I've called like all 800 numbers that exist, it feels like, but I have gotten such great help from the FAFSA hotline. You tell them exactly what question you're on. They go to that question and they give you that direct answer so that they can help you best. And I love that they also have a wonderful website, studentaidhelp.ed.gov, and you enter your question and you find a contact center that can help. And so I love that they are able to kind of triage you earlier and you know exactly who to contact and who to call so that you can get help. And this is the FAFSA helpline number directly. So if you're working on that FAFSA and have questions, this is a great number to call. If you live in Massachusetts, there is FAFSA Day for Massachusetts. It's free help with applying for financial aid for college. This is run by financial aid administrators throughout the state of Massachusetts, and it's a really wonderful free resource. So I highly recommend. They hold events in January, November. So one is coming up in November. I highly recommend that you go to fafsaday.org and you can subscribe for updates to their email list. And they would be happy to help you all with your FAFSA. They do great webinars, and my manager, Migdalia Gomez, who works at the credit union now, but previously was a financial aid administrator, she helps plan this day as well. And so they really are there to help students and parents, families who have questions about this. So that's a lot about the FAFSA. Unfortunately, there could be more forms. So the FAFSA is required by all colleges and universities because of the federal aid aspect. Sometimes colleges and universities want to get a larger picture of what your information looks like now, maybe more up to date, or maybe they're taking more things into consideration for their aid. They cannot take anything else into consideration for federal aid at this point in time. They have to take the FAFSA information into consideration for federal aid, but they possibly could take information for their own aid process. You could fill out a college financial aid form specifically for that university. My husband does that right now. We have the FAFSA as well as the university financial aid form. But then there is another form called the CSS profile. The CSS is becoming more popular, I would say, in probably the last 6 to 7 years with use by different universities. And this just has additional information, demographic and financial, and it is done through the College Board. So many universities will ask for the CSS. There is no need to fill out the CSS unless an institution has said that they require it. So that is important to note. I never filled out the CSS profile. No one at our institution ever did because we did not need that form. This is one of the most important slides in all of this presentation, and that is submitting the forms by the deadlines. Many institutions have early deadlines, they have late deadline, they have the hard stop deadline. You'll find many different dates on colleges and university websites. And unfortunately, every college and university has their own timeline of the way that they do things. At my university that I previously worked at, we had to have all information in by March, or we couldn't guarantee that you would be eligible for any aid. And it's true that I had some students reaching out in May and saying, oh, I never sent in my FAFSA. I really should have done that. And I was like, yeah, you definitely should have. But unfortunately, you know, we don't have any additional institution aid to give out at this point in time. Federal aid, of course, is first come, first serve. So you'll see that if a student turns in their FAFSA earlier, they will be eligible, possibly eligible for more aid. So it's first come, first serve. And that's something important to note, why I recommend students do it October 2nd. Aid has never run out on October 1st, I promise. But submitting the forms by the deadlines can really make a difference in whether your family can possibly afford to attend an institution. This is the first step for the student toward being more responsible, being more financially responsible for themselves. And so I highly recommend that the student take charge of when these forms are due, that they set up the organization process for this. Of course, there may be some maybe some working together on this process at first, but it is something that's important for the student to take on the ownership of. So we have all this information that we've given to these people. Now, how are they deciding what my child or my student will be receiving in aid? There are a couple of different things that we want to define here. The first being the cost of attendance, or what you may hear as COA. The COA number is a number that all institutions have to provide you. It's probably on their website, or you can go to a website that I'm going to share with you in just a few slides. But the COA is the direct billed costs, so the things that you'll see on your student's bill, as well as the indirect costs. Tuition, room, board fees, you're going to be charged for those through the online portal, through whatever it may be. Whereas the indirect costs, you're not necessarily charged for by the institution, but you will be paying this money. And that looks like getting to school. Maybe your student has a car on campus, personal expenses. Hopefully they're still spending money on things like toiletries. And then books. You're going to be spending money on books, possibly a clicker, possibly online services or web services that they're going to need, possibly a computer. Those types of things are in those indirect costs, whereas you see a direct billed cost as well. Both of these things make up what we call the cost of attendance, or the COA. And this is the number that all financial aid offices are using in their calculations. This number varies widely from college to college. I'm sure you already know that. Obviously, some universities and institutions can be somewhere around $70,000 a year in cost of attendance at this point in time, which is frankly mind-blowing. And you'll see lower end of things, possibly around $20,000, $10,000 a year for maybe a community college or other institutions that may not have as many expenditures. Another thing to define for you all is the EFC. We spoke about this number earlier in the asset and income slides, but the EFC is the expected family contribution. Is this the number that you will be paying for your student to go to school? No, it's not. But you'll receive it at the end of the FAFSA. You'll fill out the FAFSA. It'll come up with this page. It'll say, thank you for submitting the FAFSA, and it will give you your EFC. This is used to determine the financial aid eligibility of your student, and the eligibility is the important piece of the puzzle here. It's used to determine the eligibility, not how much money they will get. It's how much money they are eligible to receive. Remember this, the federal government, the institution, they were never expecting to take on the load of paying for all the students' school. The family is primarily responsible for contributing to the student's education. But this number helps to standardize the awarding process across the US. They've done their best to try to standardize this process, but it can be sometimes shocking for families to see what their EFC is. And something that I will mention briefly is that debt is not considered. So if you have student loans yourself, if you have a lot of medical bills, unfortunately, they're not considered. There's nowhere to put those things in the FAFSA. But according to certain standards, schools can take those into account if they add up to a certain amount of your income. They can't do that for student loans, but they can do that for medical bills. There are ways to kind of go around that and federal regulations that are used. So here is the formula. It's magic. Everyone uses it. Every college is doing this exact same thing. The cost of attendance of the university minus the expected family contribution equals that student's eligibility for financial aid. So here we're going to see 3 different colleges. We're going to say that all the colleges have the exact same cost of attendance. That's probably not going to happen in your case. You're probably going to see colleges with a wide variety of a cost of attendance. But for this example, we're going to go ahead and say that it's just $50,000. The EFC for the family is $10,000. That's the expected family contribution. So the need, that financial aid eligibility, is $40,000. A student could get up to $40,000. But let's go through college A, college B, college C. They're awarded different amounts in grants and scholarships. You will see that. Some universities, private institutions, offer normally a lot more money in grants and scholarships or merit-based aid. I know my institution could offer quite a bit because our cost of attendance was so high that there was a larger gap in between those two things for private institutions from public institutions. Student loans, that number is across the board the same at all 3 colleges. That is because there are federal regulations placed on federal loans, how much is available for each student. Their freshman year of college right now, the rule states that they can have up to $5,500 in federal loans. Those may be allocated a little bit differently between subsidized and unsubsidized, but every single student will be offered $5,500 their first year. It will go up each year incrementally until their junior year, where it stays the same for the year after. They could or could not be offered work study depending on their situation. With the need at $40,000, the student is going to be offered federal work study. This amount is different for each university. Each university allocates this amount differently. But what I want you to know about this work study, this is not coming directly off their bill. This is not coming directly off their bill. They have to find a job on campus. They have to work hours. They'll get paid bi-weekly in the form of a check, and it will probably come to them. So it is their responsibility to put it towards tuition, or maybe you all work out a different thing within your family that works for you. I know in my family, my parents said put any of the work study money towards those indirect costs. So gas, things like a new computer that I needed to buy my junior year of college, books, those types of things. I relied on my work study money for that. And you'll see here that the total aid awarded is different from college A to college C, although they cost the same amount across the board and our EFC is the same, our need is the same. Colleges can offer a wide array of institutional aid. So this is interesting to see. Maybe you're a different type of visual person and it looks easier for you to do this. So the need of the student would be in gray and the EFC is in red. You see here the EFC is the same across the board, 10,000, whereas the cost of the colleges are different. So there is actually no need at College D. So they will not be offered additional financial aid based on need. College C, they could only be offered up to $10,000 in aid, right? And again, 30, and here you see 40. This is another great important slide on this PowerPoint. Don't rule out for your student applying to a school because of cost. Once you receive the financial aid award letters, you can rule out a school because of cost. That is totally fine. But what we have to do is balance the understanding of experience versus cost. Of course, we don't want any of our students coming out of school with a crippling amount of debt that they're not able to pay off for quite some time. That's never the goal, not even the goal for admissions officers. It's the goal that students feel successful and that they have a college experience that is worth the amount that they pay for it. Okay. This is a great website to go to, collegecost.ed.gov. All universities and colleges are required to report specific numbers on quite a few different things. One of them specifically is that net price calculator that you see here. The net price calculator can give you a good idea of about what you would pay to go to that university. Is it always right? No. Circumstances can change. There could be new scholarships awarded at the university. There could be an opportunity for your student to get a great private outside scholarship. So know that this is just an estimate, but it could be a good place to start for you and your family, the net price calculator. All institutions are required to have a net price calculator. So every institution that your student could be looking at, they do have that net price calculator. So now we've seen, okay, this is what's happening behind the scenes. How is this working? What is the timeline for this? The schools normally receive the information in the fall and the winter, and then they'll receive an award letter. My institution, we sent out our award letters in March. A lot of times we would send out notification of missing documentation a lot earlier in the process to try to remedy that before we got to receiving the award letter, but the award letter will come and there is a possibility that a student would need to accept the award. More than likely, they're going to go ahead and accept the scholarship for you. You want the free money. If you don't, come talk to me. I'll take it off your hands. Happy to do that. But they will need to possibly accept and go through different steps to accept possible federal loans or state loans or things of that nature. So important that they get on their portal and understand that before they commit to that institution. I want to say, compare the true cost. What is the true cost versus the aid awarded? At a private institution, we would regularly give out, $25,000 per student per year. That was pretty typical at my institution. And so that was quite high, whereas at public institutions, they may only be getting $3,000, $4,000, but the cost would be a little similar. They may be similar at the end of the day. So it's important to remember the true cost. The true cost also includes all 4 years. We don't want to send our students to a school and have to have them transfer their second year because they can't afford it. We want them to be successful all 4 years. So it's important to look at the full timeline. I'm going to go through a couple of different resources now that could be helpful to you and your family. The first being Green Path Financial Wellness. If you are a member of the credit union, this is a free service we provide for our members. They are a nonprofit that works with all of our members on free credit report counseling, free budget counseling, as well as COVID-19 counseling. Why am I talking about this applying for financial aid session? Because maybe your student is a junior, maybe they're a sophomore, maybe they're a senior, and they need to get a budget working for them for their first year of college. This is a free resource. Talk about saving strategies for students. Talk about saving strategies for your own family for saving for college. Maybe this is your first student to go to school and you want to talk about how you can budget for your second student to go to school. Green Path Financial Wellness is a great resource. They do one-on-one phone counseling. They're open until 10 p.m. during the week. So they offer great hours for folks, and they offer it in over 150 languages. We have a blog on our website, Harvard University Employees Credit Union. It's the blog.hubcu.org. Recently, we are putting up an article every three articles every week, but do know we have some on there about college financing, college availability, college money availability or financing. Go on there, search our tags. They are on the right-hand side of the blog, and you can read more about articles that we've published having to do with college and paying for college. You can also subscribe to our blog so that you get one email a month. This is free to members and non-members, so please use that resource if you need to. I also ask you to fill out a survey for us about this presentation. I'm going to go ahead and send it in the chat so that you can access it. But this survey just helps me to see how this went today and if there's any changes that need to be made, or if I could have been clearer about anything. I do read over these to make sure that everything went well, or if there are any additional questions that I can answer. So please let us know if this is helpful for you. Of course, I'm not here to provide tax information. I'm not qualified for that. I'm not here to provide legal or investment advice either. I'm here to hopefully give you ideas and concepts and resources to be able to learn those things on your own. And again, all examples are just illustrative purposes only. This is some contact information for the credit union. We have about 15 additional minutes. So I would love to see if there are any additional questions that I can answer for you all. If possibly there are any lingering questions you have, maybe about the application process. Happy to answer any questions that I may have background knowledge on from my admissions days in a university and college, or possibly any financial aid questions. Please put those in the chat or the Q&A. I'm happy to answer any of those that come up. So I will be on, but if you feel like you've gotten enough information for today, more than welcome to jump off. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been my pleasure to be with you all, but I'll stick around to see if there are any questions.